Good morning, kids. Welcome to Providence Kids Online. We are so glad you're joining us this morning. Last Sunday was such a fun Sunday as we saw so many of your smiling faces drive through for coffee and donuts, and it was just so great to see all of you in person. Today, we are doing the same thing, so if you're watching this before 10 a.m., hop in your car around then, come get some donuts for you and coffee for your parents, and drop off the school supplies as we are collecting them today for the school supply drive for Bosman Intermediate. Speaking of school, many of you guys are starting school this week, and I know it looks so different than what you expected for this year, but we are still so excited for you for the year ahead, and we are praying for you guys as you launch into the school year this week, and we cannot wait to see how you learn and grow over the course of this year. Today, we are starting a new unit in kids, learning about Jesus as a miracle worker. The next several weeks will cover various stories from Scripture that point to the miracles that Jesus performed, showing that he is the Son of God. Today's lesson comes from Mark chapter 4. You can also find it in the books of Matthew and Luke, but we are looking at it in Mark this morning. And it's a story that many of you are probably familiar with. The story begins after a long day of teaching as Jesus and his disciples get in a boat to cross the Sea of Galilee. Jesus was exhausted, or at least we can assume that, because the scriptures tell us that he was asleep, and we don't hear very often of Jesus sleeping. As they were crossing the sea to get to the other side, a huge storm came through. Now, we live in Texas. You guys have experienced big thunderstorms. I'm sure right now, if you were to think about it, you could remember a thunderstorm that you've been in, where the heavy rain is coming down, the loud thundering, the bright lightning, the wind is blowing. So if you think about that, I now want you to picture that in a little boat in the middle of the water. That's where the disciples and Jesus were. And the storm was even stronger there with the waves crashing into their boat. And the disciples were scared. They were panicked, actually. And in their panic, they went to Jesus, who was asleep, and woke him. They were shocked that he was sleeping through such a massive storm. And when Jesus woke, he spoke to the wind and the waves, and he said, "Peace, be still." And the wind and the waves obeyed him. The storm calmed, and all was quiet. Jesus then turned to his disciples and said, "Why are you still afraid? Do you have no faith?" Jesus displayed right then that he is greater than anything and everything. He showed that when we are with him, we should have no fear. After he calmed the storm, the disciples asked, "Who is this man that the wind and the waves obey him?" You can imagine their shock in this moment as they processed what they had just watched. And the answer to their question is that he is our sovereign God, and he is greater than everything. What a timely message for us. God is sovereign and greater than everything. Greater than COVID-19, greater than fights with your siblings, greater than the injustices that are happening around us, greater than the wind and the storms. And because of that, we don't have to fear things of this world. Rather, we can trust in God's goodness and power. This is yet another story from Scripture, among many, that teaches us that God is in control of all things. I love Romans 28 that tells us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose." We can trust that everything God does is for his glory and our good. So whenever we face storms or difficult situations, we can remember that God will use it for good, and he is always good. Know that I'm praying for you guys this week as you enter into a new school year and go about your week. And I pray that you are reminded that God can use any storm for good. And as you face maybe some unknowns or scary situations this year, I'm praying that these truths will become so true to you. Guys, we love you and we miss you, and we hope to see you in person soon. Enjoy the Bible story this morning and have a great week.
Jesus spent all day teaching crowds of people near the Sea of Galilee. That evening, Jesus wanted to cross over to the other side of the sea. So Jesus and his disciples left the crowds. They got into a boat and began sailing. Some of the people from the crowds followed in their own boats. While Jesus and his disciples traveled, Jesus fell asleep on a cushion at the back of the boat. All of a sudden, a storm came. The wind was strong, and the waves crashed into the boat. Water was coming into the boat, and the disciples were afraid. Many of the disciples were fishermen. They had survived storms on the sea before, but this storm was different. It was so strong. If the water kept coming in the boat would sink. Surely they would all drown. The disciples looked to Jesus for help, but Jesus was still fast asleep at the back of the boat. He didn't seem to even notice the storm. Did Jesus care if they were about to sink into the sea? The disciples woke up Jesus. "Lord, save us," they said. "We are going to die." Jesus opened his eyes and saw that his friends were afraid. He got up and spoke to the wind. Then Jesus said to the sea, "Silence! Be still." At the sound of Jesus' voice, the wind stopped blowing and the waves stopped crashing. Everything was calm. The disciples were safe. Jesus looked at his disciples and asked, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Did the disciples not trust Jesus to take care of them? The disciples were amazed. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Jesus' disciples knew Jesus was a good man and a good teacher. But when Jesus calmed the wind and the waves, he showed his disciples that he is also God. God rules the sea and stills its waves.